Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a terrible game that I played many years ago. Now, this is a game between myself and my casino, and this is a game that was played by two chess players who possibly at the time, I don't think either one of us really wanted to, play this game. But essentially, I was actually new to chess.com. So when I, signed up to chess.com, I was a bit nervous. I did not know how everything worked. So yeah, this was my first game, and I played the game. I was really okay with some of my moves, and some of them were terrible, as you will see. In fact, I ended up losing this game on time, even though my opponent and myself, we were both about the same in terms of the points scored of the pieces that they captured and the pieces which I captured on my side. But, for the most part, we played a terrible game. And as you will see, as I continue to actually showcase this game to you. Now, in my previous video, I actually did a video where I actually won my first game that I recorded here on chess.com, and I uploaded that video. Have a look at the video. It's funny how I actually won that game. My opponent just resigned, at the very beginning, and they actually just like sacked a queen, to begin things off. And I was like, oh well, here's a queen. I'll just take the queen, and they just resigned on the spot. I don't know what they were thinking, but anyway, I narrate that game. You can have a look at the game and actually, yeah, enjoy that. But for this game, I actually lost this game. It was a terrible game. It was my first game that I played on, well, one of the first games which I played on chess.com. So yeah, that's the opening of this video. That's what I have to say. So let's have a look at the terrible game which I played. So I was playing on black and they were playing on white, as you can see at the top here. So here we go. So my opponent moves, their first pawn, and this is g3, and normal opening, nothing much about it. So I also then move my pawn, and I move the king's pawn to e5, trying to take care of the center, which is essentially what one would do, what one would like to do, because you really want to have some dominance within the center. This is like your classic textbook move at the very beginning of any chess match. Okay, so my opponent then moves their next pawn, which is on the c3, and I then, make my first blunder, which is moving the pawn just next or above the knights. I really had no plan as to what it is I was going to do next here, but it's a move. A move is a move. What are you going to do? So my opponent then moves their bishop in line to my rook over here. An absolute, straightforward attack on my rook at the beginning of the game. Then I actually did what I was supposed to do at the beginning of the match, which is essentially centralize my queen's pawn to d5 and also strengthening the center right over here and really trying to take control at the beginning of the game to the center. So my opponent tells me, I have other plans, and the idea is essentially possibly, taking my pawn over here. And the thing is, at this stage, I really do not have a plan, because essentially you do not want to exchange your queen, for, let's say, a pawn. That would be a terrible move, because if if I take over here, it's a terrible move because their bishop would be inside of attacking my rook. And of course, also, I cannot, obviously, if they were to take my piece here and then in exchange, take their pawn, it's not really a fair exchange, so to speak. Oops, I'm drawing terrible lines now everywhere. Why am I doing that? Why am I doing that? Well, like I said, this was a terrible game. There we go. So, next move, I'll strengthen the attack, or rather strengthening the position of this pawn right over here by putting my bishop in line, and also then backing it up with the queen. So they then played their next move. Apparently the PC or computer does not like this move, possibly does not make any sense. But anyway, a move is a move, as I have already mentioned. So then I play my move, which is again strengthening the position of the two pawns here, which are in line, as you can see. And they then start to decide, you know what, I'm also going to have some action here by actually bringing their knight onto the onto c3, and essentially attacking this piece and actually strengthening the attack onto this piece. But at this stage, I have a bishop, I have a knight, or whoops, or rather I have a knight right over here, and I also have an attacking queen right over here. So they, of course, have got the pawn, the knight, and they've also got their bishop at this stage. Awesome. So we move on, and I move my knight to d7, essentially once again, strengthening the position of this piece. Now, at this stage, there is no other piece which is eyeing this piece right over here. But for some reason, I thought this is a good move to actually put my knight in the attacking path of a queen. Now, like I said, this was a terrible move because essentially, if we go back, all right, and just remove all these arrows. Now, how on earth do you remove all these arrows? There we go. Cool. So this was a terrible move. Putting, my knight in the path of my queen, essentially weakening the piling up of moves onto this pawn right over here. So now my position is a bit weak, but nonetheless, this is what I did. And this was an opportunity, for my opponent to actually make a move on this piece, but they did not. All good and well. So they moved their knight to h3, and I just continued to also, ignore the center for whatever reason, when I should have actually made moves to strengthen my position here with my structural pawns. Maybe possibly moving this piece over here, and again, or rather actually moving this piece right over here, which is now, a pawn to a pawn. But anyway, I decided to move my pawn here on g3, on the g6. So my opponent then castles, and I then move my next piece, which is a g7. My opponent retaliates with the same remove, and I advance. Now, this is not necessarily a bad move because I put my pawn on e4, essentially, blocking the path of this bishop, and also kind of moving the tension away from my pawn right over here. Possibly asking my opponent, to, keep an eye on this one rather as opposed to this one. But anyway, it's a move. And my opponent then moves the rook onto b1 on their side of the board. And now, as you can see, the attention really is moving from this pawn, which was the one that was being attacked. And now I'm strengthening the position of this pawn. And this was the next move from my opponent. Not necessarily sure what that does, other than, again, just putting more pressure on this pawn. And to stop that, I move my pawn to g5, trying to kick out this knight away from, the central attack. So they move back, and not sure what this does. And my opponent then comes back, and they actually just captured this pawn. And again, this was the point where I possibly should have moved my where I possibly should have moved to h6 and strengthening this pawn. So they capture, and I have no move to retaliate with. But now I move my h6 pawn. And this is something which I should have done at the very beginning, when I actually kicked out this knight and it went back, to this square right over here. So they go back, and I castle, okay. Not essentially sure what this does as well. But again, well, I mean, it is a move possibly stopping maybe this pawn from advancing forward, or maybe stopping, my bishop from coming here, and then maybe, moving all the way here. But they already had a pawn. to counteract whatever move I bring to this side of the board. So it's about time, I capture a piece on their side of the board and playing c4, and they capture back, and I move my bishop. And maybe this was the idea, to possibly move my bishops over to this side of the board with the backing of the queen. But they already had a knight looking at this square, and they already had a queen also possibly looking at the square. So I would possibly lose a bishop just for a pawn here, which is not really a fair trade. So the game advances, and just like that, they move their knights in the path of my bishop. So essentially here, I would capture this knight, but they would have a pawn to capture back or recapture back, and they would also have this pawn as well to recapture back. Now, at this point, perhaps a better move for me, given that this knight was here, was to possibly maybe say move to a6, because there's nothing guarding this piece at this point. But instead, I decide to take this piece with no plan as to what I do if they capture, in response, which is exactly what they do. What also happens is that it allows this piece or this rook to come to this file and possibly, capture my piece here on the A file. And I'm not sure how long it would have taken me to perhaps move a piece, to bring it over to this side. Possibly maybe my king, then protecting this piece over here, which I think is what I did. Yeah, which is what I did. So not a bad move, a very good move. And my, and my opponent, or rather, what I do after my opponent moves their queen to, again, try and, come through to attacking this pawn on the A file. And for some reason, I did not take note of that, but instead, I just bamboozled my way forward and played d2 with my queen. Now, this is a lost opportunity because at this point, this is where they should have moved their rook over to the A file, essentially strengthening this line of attack all the way to this side, because that then would have caused a really, 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 really quick checkmate. But for some reason, which is obviously a good reason, I think I saw that, and I moved my queen in the path of their queen. And so they retreated, and I think this was a rather good move, essentially moving my piece and moving my rook rather in d3, attacking the queen. So they move out of the way. And this is essentially good when it comes to the game of chess, just piling up your rooks, because now the rooks can see each other, and essentially they're also backing each other up, and essentially also just dominating, this whole file. So my opponent then brings their piece, or rather brings their rook to d1. And I think here I actually have a losing structure, because if I take, they take, I take, and they take with the queen. So at this point, I would essentially be a rook down. What do I do? I take. What do? They take. What do I do? And I take as well. Well, it looks like we were actually equal at this point. I move my king here to c8, essentially, strengthening, or rather essentially stopping any attack coming from the back rank. And my opponent also then moves to f4, and I attack their bishop, and they back that up, and I move back, take, or rather move into this position, and they take a pawn. I retreat. Yep, yep, take. Moving, to try and see what moves or possibilities exist within the side of the board. They take my piece, and yep, and I retaliate back. And at this point, I just run out of time. And that was a terrible game that I played. Terrible game that I played. Anyway, there are more games which I am now playing on chess.com, and I wish to bring those to you. So yeah, I look forward to bringing those games. And I do want to show you it gets better. It gets way better, from here in terms of the games which I played. But in the previous video, which was the first video that I recorded, I uploaded the game that I played, which I won. But in the game of chess, you lose, you win, and there's just so much in this game that one can come to appreciate. And yeah, I hope you appreciated this game, but there's more to come. And like I say, it does get better. So yeah, looking forward to sharing that with you in the upcoming games. For now, take care. I'll catch you the next one.